Hello there, dear ones. How are you feeling today? I hope you're keeping warm and safe in the sudden chill. It was -2 degrees outside our home last night, and Panth decided to forego his usual midnight stroll. Panth and I have been decorating our home for Christmas. Yes, it is a little early, but there is nothing so comforting when the night's drawing as the sight of Christmas tree lights shining through the dark. Today's story takes place around Halloween, but it has that odd shivery sense of unease about it that reminds me of my favorite Christmas ghost stories. The story was written by a friend of mine from Sweden. He knows a lot about the strange things that go bump in the winter night. So, climb into your fluffy onesies, heat up your mulled wine, make sure your Christmas lights are on slow wave, and prepare to face the guardian of Samhain. The Guardian of Samhain. Chapter 1, 28th October. She should never have bought the pumpkin figure. Terry knew it. If she thought back, she had known it at the time. But it had been so mesmerizing, so oddly attractive, that she had already been half under its spell before she realized the danger. Chapter 2, 28th October. The figures. Spindly, cloaked bodies swamped by frozen cloaks, their heads the shape of a grinning jack-o'-lantern, stood in a row at the back of a table filled with Halloween decorations. At first, Terry didn't think much of them. There were 20 of them, all made of that same semi-sheer plastic used in 3D printers. The creator had obviously used as many colors of plastic as they had available, ranging from bright, merry orange to a rather disturbing yellow-brown. However, none of them had particularly caught Terry's eyes, until they settled on one at the center. The pumpkin figure was pink, a deep fuchsia. Not a color one generally associated with fall or Halloween. Still, on closer inspection, it revealed a patina of orange and gold, laid across its surface, beneath which lay twisting skeins of green that looked almost like veins. When she lifted the figure in her hands, the pumpkin's eyes, which she had initially thought were printed too deeply, caught the overhead lights and seemed to flicker and flare, as if lit by a candle flame. The attention to detail alone made it impressive, but it was something more than that that made her reach into the pocket of her school bag. The figure was 3 pounds. Her last 3 pounds were in the front pocket. Strictly speaking, it was hers, but her stepfather, Mick, would be looking for beer money. If she went home penniless, he would give her a thrashing that would make sitting down painful for days. The fact that she was 13 now didn't stop him. In fact, she had the unsettling feeling that he enjoyed it more. Typically, Terry was much too smart to trade Pruses for a mere plastic figure, but call that 1 pound, honey? The old woman running the stall chirped. A special price for a special young lady. Terry barely thought before placing a single pound coin into the woman's hand and hurrying away. Chapter 3, 28th October. By the time Terry got home, she was 10 minutes late. Only 10 minutes, but it was enough to turn her insides to water. She hurried across the parking lot of the Grasslands Hotel, returning the wave of the owner, Mr. Vic, who called her honey, while unashamedly looking at her legs when she went swimming in the motel's crummy pool. Terry and her mother had been renting the shabby, 3-room apartment on the ground floor of the motel. For as long as Terry could remember, Mick had come later, the last in Tiffany's endless list of crummy boyfriends. Terry didn't see what her mother saw in Mick, except that overweight, balding, and unemployed seemed to be her type. Unfortunately, Mick was also physically powerful, enough to back up his rotten temper with action. Terry had seen the bruises on Tiffany's arms and legs, but every time she tried to raise the subject, her mother shut her down. In her eyes, Mick was Prince Charming, and nothing that either he or Terry did was going to alter that. Terry let herself in with her key and placed her school bag on the chair. She had hoped that Mick would have drunk himself to sleep by now, but when she looked up, he was there, slouched on the sofa, shirt open and beer in hand. "You're late." His voice was surprisingly clear, for someone who had no doubt been drinking since dawn. "Only 10 minutes. Mick wiped his mouth. "Do we need to repeat our discussion on curfews?" Dread curdled in Terry's stomach. The bus was stuck in traffic, that's all. She hated the pleading note in her voice. "Did you bring me my beer money?" Terry had the 2-pound coins ready in her hand. "Here. 2 pounds? That's it." Mick looked disgusted. Parents are paying lunch bills online or sending their kids in with pre-prepared food. There's nobody to take from. "I see." His hooded eyes were yellow as bile. "Then I guess this will have to do." Terry relaxed when he slid the 2 coins into his pocket, snagging her bag and heading towards her bedroom at the back of the building. "Wait." Mick barked. "What is it?" "We're forgetting your punishment." "But you know what the rules are. Late back from school means 10 hits. 15 if you try to wriggle out of it." "Come on, Mick." "Come on, Terry." Mick patted his lap. "Over here. Unless you want to make it 20 hits. Terry stared at him, her instincts screaming at her to run and her mind, the traitor, telling her that she had nowhere to go. "Unless you want your mother to take your spanking for you." Terry let out a furious sob and stretched herself over Mick's lap. He lifted her skirt and hit her 15 times, harder than usual, but she knew better than to cry out. Chapter 4, 28th October. Tiffany didn't wake up until 8 p.m. By then, Terry's furious tears had dried, and she was on her bed, wearing jogging bottoms and trying not to put any weight on her bruises. Terry got up to see her. The stink of her mother's breath translated to whiskey hangover. Terry made a hopeful mention of ordering dinner from somewhere. There wasn't a scrap of food in the house, but Tiffany threw her such a black look that Terry quickly fell silent. Terry sat up with Tiffany and Mick for about an hour, staring at the flickering TV screen. When Terry's hungry stomach growled a little too loudly, Mick looked at her with a shit-eating grin. "What?" Terry asked. "I'm hungry. Considering your bad behavior earlier, I think you should go to bed without supper, young lady." He sneered. "But I had no money for lunch." "Do as your father says." Tiffany barked. "Bed, now." The hatred in Terry swelled too quickly for her to cork it, and she heard herself snap. "He is not my father." "Now." Tiffany roared. Terry fled the living room. Chapter 5, 28th October. Just before midnight, Terry heard heavy footsteps approaching her door. Once, her door had had a lock, Tiffany had knocked it out with a chisel and hammer, ignoring her daughter's red, tear-filled eyes as she did so. Terry squeezed her eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. It didn't work, of course. A weight settled on the bed, pressing her, squeezing the air from her lungs. For a time, the bed squeaked rhythmically. When the weight was gone, Terry turned over and looked at the pumpkin figure she had placed on her bedside table. She whispered, "At least you know." Chapter 6, 29th October. The next morning, Terry was listless and tired. She spent a long time in the shower, scrubbing and scrubbing until her skin bled. By the time she'd dressed, Terry was running late. Luckily, Mick and Tiffany were tumbled together in an inebriated tangle on the sofa and were not able to delay her further with an inventive punishment. She made it in time for attendance. Once again, the teacher didn't notice that Terry winced when she sat. School was the usual routine. Terry sitting in silence, staring at her desk, while a parade of teachers droned on and on, with information that didn't interest her in the slightest. The only interesting thing happened at lunch. Laura Kennedy approached her, her twin moons, Casey and Shelby, snickering behind her. Laura had once been Terry's best friend, back when they'd both been grubby motel kids together. Then Laura's mom remarried to a doctor, and suddenly, her friendship for Terry had turned into seething hatred. Terry had approached the teachers for help multiple times over the years, but nobody would ever believe a tattered student in hand-me-downs over the teen queen of designer labels. Nowadays, she treated Laura's bullying the same way she did anything that hurt her. She hunkered down and endured. "Hey, Turdy Terry," Laura crooned. "Really, Laura? That nickname was getting old in middle school. Then it suits you. Just make with the bullying. Get it over with." Something evil flickered in Laura's eyes. "So kind of you to give me permission." She lifted her hand and slapped Terry hard. Terry didn't respond. She only blinked, but deep down, her heart ached. Not due to Laura's violence. She was accustomed to pain, but because of the utter lack of response from the people around her. Not even the lunch hall monitors raised an eyebrow. All of that reaffirmed what she had already suspected, that nobody cared about her. Laura lifted her hand for another strike. Terry stared at her dully. That was when the different thing happened. Rather than bringing her hand swinging down, Laura froze. Her eyes widened. Her face paled. Her lip trembled. Her eyes fixed on something over Terry's shoulder, and she uttered a sound like a sob, then turned and raced away across the lunch hall, Casey and Shelby fluttering behind her, like confused moths. Terry spun on her heel, trying to figure out what had unnerved Laura, but all she saw was the dingy avocado wall. Throughout the day, Terry noticed other people glancing behind her, their eyes widening in fear for a moment before flickering away. However, quickly, she turned. She couldn't see what they were looking at. That evening, the footsteps came to Terry's room earlier than usual. The bed frame knocked against the wall so hard that it chipped a chunk out of the plaster. Terry's dreams were full of her pumpkin figure, grown as tall as a man, its eyes glowing with unforgiving golden light as it stared down upon her. Chapter 7, 30th October. The next day, the school was full of excitement. The proximity of Halloween was familiar enough to the high school students that anticipation might have been disdained as childish, but the annual Halloween carnival enhanced the experience to the point that it regained a phantom thrill. Bats and witches' hats hung in the windows, and pumpkins grinned from the desks of teachers in various ironic costumes. Some of the kids were dressed as witches, zombies, and ghouls. Others simply dressed in black and called it a day, much to the disdain of the emo and goth children. Beneath the giddy, autumnal rush, however, was a thread of unease. Casey and Shelby had disappeared from their bedrooms last night, leaving behind only blood-sodden blankets. Thus far, the police had no leads. Had it happened in another town, it might have been considered exhilarating, adding spice to the seasonal celebrations. It was in Newton, however, the same place the students walked and talked and loved and dreamed. And that rendered the mystery far too close for comfort. Several odd things happened that day. People were still looking over Terry's shoulder, their faces twisting, as if they had seen something loathsome, but no one said anything. For once, the teachers left her alone, some even complimenting the tattered white dress she wore as her nod to a ghost. For the first time in forever, Terry received no lunchtime detentions. She even had enough cash to treat herself to a chicken burger. What astonished Terry the most was the moment that Laura approached her. The usually polished girl looked tired and worn. Still, Terry was braced for another slap. Instead, Laura looked into her face, uttered a low sob, and threw her arms around her. Terry stood, frozen, unable to process the sudden change in reality. "I'm sorry," Laura whispered. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me for being so cruel." Terry worked her throat and finally managed to gasp. "Why? I was so horrible to you." Laura drew back, her eyes shining with tears. "I promise I will do better." Terry said, her voice choking as her mind replayed every cruel thing Laura had done. Then, quite unexpectedly, recollection presented the image of them as little girls, giggling as they jumped in puddles in the motel parking lot. "I forgive you," Terry said. Laura whimpered. "Thank you." She paused, then whispered, "Please call off the pumpkin thing." Terry tried to ask Laura what she meant, but the girl had already fled. Chapter 8, 30th October. Mick was awake and waiting when Terry got home. When Terry saw his flushed face and glassy eyes, she knew she was in trouble. Just as she expected, he indicated an old floor lamp, clearly kicked by him, in a temper, and accused her of breaking it. Her excuses went unheard. He gave her a choice between two punishments. With tears in her eyes, Terry chose the second and followed Mick out back, where his car was parked. She closed her eyes and tried not to think as his heavy, lumpen body moved on top of her. He didn't reach the desired end. Just as his movements grew faster, he looked up. He must have seen something that upset him, because he climbed off her, shoving himself hurriedly into his trousers, and speed walked back into the motel. Terry took her time coming back in, hoping that he would pass out. But by the time she'd cleaned herself up and climbed out of the car, he was ready and waiting, belt in hand. She screamed and begged when he hit her, but Tiffany never stirred, not even when Mick barricaded Terry in her room and warned her not to come out again until morning. Desperate for some kind of comfort, Terry picked up the pumpkin statue and held it close to her. She clutched it, as she heard Tiffany stumble out of her room and demand to know what had happened to the lamp. Mick must have made some excuse, because her screeching voice quieted, and thereafter, she heard only the popping of beer cans and the blare of the TV. Between the welts from the belt and her other hurts, Terry didn't sleep until midnight. This time, she dreamed she rode the shoulder of the pumpkin figure. She watched as it stalked the night, arriving at the windows of Casey and Shelby, climbing in and snatching them from their beds. Its tooth-filled mouth speaking only her name, Terry. She saw it stalk Laura, then follow her around school, drawing terrified glances from people wherever she went. Finally, she saw it looming over Mick as he slept, growling low in its throat as it repeated her name. Chapter 9, 31st October. Terry woke on the morning of Halloween feeling so much pain, she seriously considered not going to school. Only the thought of being trapped in the motel with Mick all day sent her limping towards the shower. Part of her wondered if she would arrive to find that Laura had vanished. Instead, as soon as she set foot on school grounds, the other girl came running up to her and clasped her in a hug. "Thank you so much, Terry. You called off the Guardian." "Guardian?" Terry asked. "The Guardian of Samhain. He extracts vengeance for those who are unable to do it themselves. You deserved revenge. Thank you so much for sparing me." Okay, was all that Terry could manage. As soon as Laura departed, Terry hurried to the school's computer bank and booked a half-hour internet session. It took her only 10 minutes to find an in-depth essay on the legend of the Guardian of Samhain. The legend of the Guardian of Samhain begins in the early 17th century. Traced back to the New World, it surrounds an ancient spirit of justice that appears with a human body and a pumpkin head. To summon it, you make an effigy of the Guardian and place it in your home, as close to your bed as possible. If you do this correctly, the energy of your dreams will attract the Guardian's attention. If you treat the Guardian with respect and house it for at least 3 days before Halloween, by midnight on Halloween night, it will have destroyed anyone who seeks to harm you. Chapter 10, 31st October. By the time she arrived home from school, Terry was buzzing with anticipation. For once, Mick didn't stop her to demand money. Instead, he just nodded at her and went back to watch his racing program. Terry walked back to her bedroom. When she saw the pumpkin figure on her bedside table, she smiled at it and bowed her head. She showered and changed, wondering how and if the Guardian would appear. But by dinner time, nothing had happened. Terry's disappointment was somewhat abated when Mick called to announce that he'd ordered pizza and bought sweets to give to any trick-or-treaters who stopped by. Terry was surprised by his sudden largesse, especially since things hadn't ended in his favor the day before. Still, she wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to eat, especially with the scents of cheese and pepperoni wafting towards her. She and Mick watched a movie as they ate. However, soon after she finished her slices, Terry started to feel sick. Mick helped her to her bedroom. Soon after she closed her eyes, Terry began to dream. First, she dreamed that Mick came into her room. She felt his weight on her, but was distracted by Tiffany shouting at someone. Through the paper-thin walls of the motel, Terry could hear everything. That newcomer spoke to Tiffany in a stern voice. asking if Tiffany knew what Mick had been doing to Terry. When Tiffany shouted drunkenly that she didn't care, the speaker said nothing. But moments later, Tiffany began to scream. Time passed in a blur until Terry's door slid open. She was horrified, but also, somehow, comforted, when her door flew open to reveal the Guardian, now towering over 8 feet tall, glittering blood pumping through his exposed veins. "Unhand the girl," the Guardian growled. To Terry's amazement, Mick shook his head. "No." "Release her," the Guardian demanded. "No." Mick answered. The Guardian made a sound that was almost a sigh. "Will you ever free the poor girl from your desires?" "Never." Mick spat. "The girl is mine." "I am so glad you said that." The Guardian began to chuckle. "I hate it when I am deprived of my prey." It reached out. Its gnarled hand twisted like a tree root and plucked Mick off her. Mick was either too startled to scream or couldn't get the breath to do it. Whatever the truth, the last thing Terry saw was his crimson face and protruding tongue as the Guardian dragged him out of the motel and into the waiting night. Chapter 11, 31st October. The police never found Mick's body. Tiffany's corpse was in Tiffany's bedroom, sliced into so many pieces that the detectives questioned whether she had been attacked with a chainsaw. When Terry told the police what the adults had been doing to her, they briefly suspected her of being the killer. However, when the police doctor confirmed everything that she had told them, including that there was no blood on her hands or under her nails, the idea was dropped. By the 8th of November, Terry had been placed in a foster family. By Christmas, the Johnsons had decided to formalize her presence through adoption. Terry was in counseling with a wonderful woman. Terry told her everything, except for the truth about the Guardian. By the time 6 months had passed, Terry had almost forgotten what had happened. Terry and the Johnsons moved towns in August, so Terry was not there to see what happened at the motel that next Halloween. A dark figure in a cloak appeared on the lot behind the motel, carrying a large and oddly lumpen orange squash. If anyone had observed them closely, they would have been amazed to see that the pumpkin bore a face that was the exact double of Mick's. The figure began to speak to the pumpkin, its voice rumbling like tectonic plates, rubbing together miles beneath the earth. If someone had stood very near, they would have heard the pumpkin raise its voice in the protest. "The girl is mine." That was when the figure drew out a blade and a ladle and began to cut. Moments later, the pumpkin began to scream. Subscribe to become a delicious darling. What a chilling ending. May I say that I am not in the least bit sorry for Mick. In fact, the Guardian deserves a round of applause. What do you think? Have you ever met anyone who you would like to introduce to the Guardian? If so, why not type the word Guardian and let me know in the comments. Today, I am going to start translating some Christmas-themed, spooky fiction. If you would like to keep a panth and eye protected from spectral intruders, please hit like and subscribe and tap the notification bell. Not only will you be alerted of all future great content, but you will become an official delicious darling and part of our spooky kooky family. Until I see you again, remember to take care of your family, whether blood or found. Invest time in making a happy home. Don't be afraid to stand against injustice. And sleep well, my delicious darlings.